the dot. Okay, no worries. I'm sure they'll catch up with us. It's 6:30 on the dot. So we will start tonight's scrutiny meeting. Please remember that when you use the microphone, you must press the button to switch it off after you've spoken, as the system does only allow for one of our devices to be on at a time. The camera does automatically pan towards you. The red light means it's active. The green light means it's waiting for somebody else to turn theirs off. Please speak directly into the top of the microphone and avoid turning your head when speaking, so it's broadcast for those online and for those of hard of hearing. Can I remind all non-committee members that they will be given an opportunity to speak before the committee debate on each item. I will also ask people to introduce themselves as they come in for the first time, so we all know kind of who we are and why we're here. Item number 1, apologies. Anthony.
We've got an apology from Councillor Rory Major.
Thank you, Anthony. And also Emma Parker is joining us online, but is not in the room. Item 2, we have the minutes. Is everyone happy for me to confirm and sign the minutes of the last meeting? I see nodding, I see no dissent. Excellent, I will sign those at the appropriate time. Thank you, everybody. Item 3, declarations of interest. Does any member have a declaration they need to make on top of what's already been disclosed? No, perfect, thank you so much. Item 4, public participation. We have no public participation, so we move over that. Item 5, questions from councillors. We have no questions from councillors. Item 6, urgent items. There's no urgent items as such. Item 7, the Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee work programme. So we're reviewing the draft work programme for this year. Does anyone want to add anything or bring anything up on it? Or can we leave it as is and add to it when appropriate? Perfect. Item 8, we're going to quickly look at the executive arrangements and the forward plans. So we've had Cabinet's forward plans have been put onto the system. Again, as something comes up, please do email, suggest anything you think we want to look at. I didn't spot anything screaming at us. No one seems to be indicating they have disagreements, so we'll move on. Item 9, the risk management. So we had a review of the risk register, which we do in confidential, because obviously it's looking at the risks of the council. Following the briefing of the register, there was one item which we wanted to look into a bit further, and there will be an appropriate an appropriate confidential catch-up and a briefing on that for the members, so we can then come back and give our assurance that we're happy with the risk programme going forward. Everybody happy with that? Brilliant. Move to item 10 on the agenda, the Corporate Complaints Team Annual Report, 2023 to 2024. This was very interesting reading, so thank you for that. And I believe, Anthony Bygrave, you're going to be presenting on this. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair, councillors, members of the public that are watching. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to have a look at the report. I agree, there is quite a lot in there. Dorset Council have one corporate complaints team, which is really the envy of all of England, because I'm contacted all the time by colleagues across other local authorities trying to see how they can put in place a corporate function that sits under the monitoring officer, and that's the preferred LGO model. So we work really closely with the LGO, and I'm going to focus a little bit on their role in this as I go along. So just to take a little bit of the drama out of this, there's some sensational headlines here, if you want to find them. The first thing that jumps off the page is in 23-24, we had the second highest volume of complaints across Dorset Council since Dorset Council began. But, and this is a very big one, I think the key thing for me is it demonstrates that we've got a very, very easy to find, accessible, fit for purpose complaints function. People are using it, and people are very comfortable giving us feedback, both positive and negative. We've got processes in place and a team trained to deal with them. So I'm really pleased that actually the number is as high as it is. I would be very suspicious and concerned if we had a low volume of complaints. I'd wonder where the challenge was coming from. I'd wonder what we're learning, and I wonder what the point and the value in it would be. So to get such a cross-section of complaints across the directorates, I think is encouraging. And when we'll get onto the Ombudsman's figures in a moment, and we will, I think it's a tremendously good news story for Place in particular. So I will highlight some of those points as we go. The Ombudsman, and again, I talk about sensationalism. There's a tendency to look at the volume of complaints that the Ombudsman upheld. I want to talk you through this if I can. 79% of upheld complaints suggest a systemic problem. What I want to tell you is only 7% of any of our complaints got to the Ombudsman at all. We have a single stage process for corporate and place complaints. We get it right most of the time, and only 5 place complaints were upheld. Half of Dorset Council's complaints fall in place. The fact that only 5 of them were upheld is remarkable. And of those, 2 of them, the Ombudsman had said, fair enough, you've done everything that we would ask you to do. Place, I think, is probably the directorate above all others that are actually working really hard in delivering outcomes, learnings, and doing the Ombudsman's job for them so that they don't have to do it. So I think we should be very proud of the efforts in place. It's a one report for all of Dorset Council, so some of this is more relevant to the committee meeting I went to this morning for people in health. There is an issue in and around SEN at the moment, which is a national issue with provision for SEN families. So most of the Ombudsman cases that were upheld is in relation to that. There's a small number of adult social care cases upheld by the Ombudsman, but say over 50% of our complaints are in and around place, and only 5 are upheld. And I'm really pleased to see that the learnings and the actions that we're getting from complaints are of value. I'll talk a little bit about timescales. The timescales are statutory for children's and adults for place. We say 20 working days. The risk is fairly low if we do go over, and if we do ever have to go over, we make sure that the complaints team are communicating that, and it would only be for a very good reason in exceptional circumstances. I think there's work to do on timescales across Dorset. I think it is improving year on year, but some of our timescales are able to be improved upon. And I think there are pressures in services to actually meet that. So some of our managers in place, for example, aren't desk-bound. They're out doing the job. So it is sometimes challenging to meet the deadlines, but that's something which has improved year on year. The financial implications, I think, will spring off the page as well. Again, I think they're in and around SEN provision. The Ombudsman have got, I think that for the 3rd year running, it's something in the region of about £40,000 of financial implications and costs, if you like, from complaints that have got to the Ombudsman. I think there was £2,000 in relation to adult social care. In terms of place and non-social care issues, although there's a small number upheld, I don't think there are any financial implications attributed to that. So again, an issue with SEN across Dorset and England, but Place should be really proud of their record with the Ombudsman. I think that's probably all I wanted to highlight from the actual report itself, other than the fact we do take compliments as well. It sounds obvious, and I think Place generate probably more compliments than any other directorate. I personally value that, working for a team that deal primarily with negative sentiment. It's really good to celebrate those positive messages, and there's learning to be had from that as well. So I'd encourage everybody across Dorset that there is a compliments function as well that we look after. And it's really good to see a balanced critique in these reports. So please do pay attention to the numbers. They are on the up, the compliments across Dorset, and we should be encouraged by that. I wonder if I should invite questions. Like Quentin Tarantino, I'll just talk for ages unless someone stops me. So perhaps I'll stop and invite any questions.
Before I move to questions, sorry, do you want to cover the SEND side of it and the travel and transport and those? Because that is where the majority of the complaints were. And it's great to hear how great the Place director is doing, but should we focus on the one that kind of needs that level of scrutiny?
Thank you ever so much. It's a really good point. I need to be clear that it's SEN is in relation to provision of school places. It's not in relation to transport, so it's a children's services issue rather than the Place.
I think you're under the apprehension that we won't be looking at those, but this is scrutiny and they are part of the document we're scrutinising. So we will be looking into the SEND complaints that will uphold. Do you want to talk about any of those? Go straight to questions on them.
No, thank you. Thank you for your clarity. No, more than happy. As I say, the provision of placements for children with EHCP plans, there is a shortfall of available spaces for those that want them. This is a national issue as well as one purely for Dorset. The Ombudsman will uphold complaints of children who are out of education for a period. So we have seen, I'm happy to say it's going down this year actually, but for the 23-24 period, there was an increase in complaints in and around that, and some of them got to the Ombudsman and there was a financial penalty for those.
Excellent, thank you. Is the Cabinet member for, I'm not sure who the Cabinet member is for complaints. Looking at Nick to see if he can give me an idea of who the Cabinet member is for complaints. Is there a Cabinet member for London that would wish to speak on it? No? Okay, fantastic. Then we will move directly to non-member questions. Councillor Parry.
Thank you. In respect of SEND provision, place provision, of course, we do have our own shareholding in such provision in Coombe House, but I know that was subject to the completion of certain building works. Can we have some sort of update on whether that has actually happened and those additional classroom facilities are now ready, or are they behind schedule?
If I may, I think that would probably be one for a representative of Children's Services. The complaints function hold the mirror up, but the provision of the service is with the service.
Thank you. Yeah, just a reminder that the scrutiny committee today is here, and your scope is place and resources. And while I understand complaints and the full complaint report has been provided to you, the committee that met this morning, which has remit for education, has already scrutinised in terms of SEND and education provision. There will be a shareholders committee coming up in terms of the Dorset Centre of Excellence, and so it may be that your questions can be put to that committee or to representatives of Children's Services in advance of that. I hope that helps.
So I'm going to just push back a little here. So Jonathan told us that our job is to scrutinise everything except for a couple of very specific areas which are people only. And we were sent this as something to scrutinise and spent time scrutinising it. I don't think it's right we're being told during the meeting that we're only meant to be focusing on part of it, because that was not something that I was aware of, and I certainly hadn't treated the paper that way. We scrutinised the whole paper. And so, as you say, the specific questions for Children's can go to Children's, but when it comes to the complaints, and to quote the report, the tremendously large increase in amount paid out, I think that it's fair that we do scrutinise that, as was the job we were told to and tasked with. Councillor Parry.
Thank you, Chair, because the nature of my question was that from the complaints report, it's about place sufficiency, and the building works required to build that capacity sits with the Place Directorate, Children's, until such time as that would be handed over to Children's to then allocate the placement. My question was around whether we are on course to deliver that building project.
I think Jan can actually come in on this. He is signifying he can answer, so I'm going to hand over to Jan.
Thank you, Chair. Jan Britton, Executive Lead for Place. Yes, the latest tranche of construction work for new classroom facilities at Coombe House was completed fairly recently, and I believe the keys were handed over to the school operating the site in the first week of November, which was a little later than planned because it should have come online for the new school term in September, but there were construction reasons why that target wasn't met, which I don't know the detail of. So I think we delivered the new facilities, I think 6 weeks later than originally planned.
Does any other committee, non-committee member wish to ask a question on any of the complaints, or should we move to committee members? Excellent. So, David Took, go for it.
Thank you, Chair. As a ward councillor, I get people emailing me, stopping me in the street, talking to me and complaining about one or two things. The things that they mostly complain about are failure to collect the bins, state of the roads, and in season, flooding. And it's a little hard to see where those are covered in this report. The favourite one, of course, is missed bin collections, and there's lots of vehicle breakdowns are offered as excuses, or reasons, I should say. And this happens. But I'd like to know what sort of number of contacts we're having with people ringing up to say, my bin wasn't collected, my assisted collection didn't take place, my food bin hasn't been collected, or alternatively, in terms of potholes in roads, because those are the things that seem to exercise the people that live in my ward most, and I'd like to get some numbers on them if I can across the county. Is that possible?
Fantastic. So I just want a little bit of clarity. I think these are complaints when they are official that we haven't followed our own policies. However, the numbers of those reports, I'm sure, can be secured as well. I'm just looking to hand over back now.
Thank you, Chair. A really good question. The Ombudsman last year introduced a code. I don't know if people are familiar with it, but it's given really good clarity on when local authorities can consider a complaint and when it's a service request. I think some of the reason that the complaint volumes have actually fallen in place, if you look at the year-on-year comparison, is because 9 times out of 10 they were a service request, so we're treating them as service requests, we're resolving them. It becomes a complaint to my mind if it becomes evidence of a systemic failure. So if someone's saying this is the 5th time my bin's been missed, I think we'll investigate, we'll find out why and where the problem is. But 9 times out of 10 it's a one-off and we want to resolve it. It's a request for a service, let's deliver the service.
Thank you. But that information should be readily accessible that you're requesting. I'm sure Jan can disseminate that appropriately.
Yes, indeed. In the performance data that we routinely collect, there'll be data for missed bin collections, which I can't remember the figure off the top of my head, but it's a very small percentage when you think that we're collecting numerous bins from 380,000 residents. So the figure is very small, but I'm more than happy to circulate that after the meeting.
Thank you, Jan. And I'm also really assured that you're collecting performance data. I think as much performance data as possible you could send us until they create the dashboard. That would be really useful. Councillor Took.
Thanks, Chair. I think part of what I was trying to get to the root of is these are complaints. Are they complaints? Have we followed our processes? Yeah, we probably have. Nevertheless, we have failed to actually pick up the bins or sort the road. What people do is they go online and they can record it as an instance, but that's not necessarily classed as a complaint. Whereas if it keeps on going and it's happening all the time, constantly, drip, 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 then it should be treated as a serious failure on the part of the council. And I take the point about a very small percentage, and out of 500,000 transactions that are going on, 2% is a fairly small percentage. It's a very big number, and it's the numbers rather than percentages that I think are important as well. So I just think we need to know what's going on with these minor complaints, if you like, but those minor complaints are the things that affect my residents day in, day out, week in, week out. So I think we need to keep on top of that. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And I think actually it's clear from Jan's response that he'll provide us with that data. And you're right. And especially if that 0.5% is the same route every time, that's a much more systemic issue. And that would be looking at the performance based criteria, so we can look at that separately, but this is specifically about the complaints that have come through and then also then been upheld by the Ombudsman. So this is a much more higher level, a more specific matter. But yes, absolutely, in the future, let's do that as well. Absolutely, so let's look at that. Does anybody else on the committee wish to ask anything about these? So I can start prompting a bit if everyone's happy. Oh, Ray, go for it. Leave it on, it's you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. I'm Councillor Ray Bryan, I act as Vice Chairman of this committee, and I represent the ward of St Leonards and St Ives. One of the questions I'd like to ask is whether we have any breakdown between complaints that affect our statutory services against the rest of the services that we provide, because obviously it's the statutory services that I would expect to see very few complaints on, because that's our legal obligation. But I'm just wondering whether we've got any data that covers that. Thank you, Chairman.
No, thank you, Councillor. It's a really good point, actually. I think I'd need to look again at the breakdown across the services and see which actually do relate specifically to... Because I think where it becomes a grey area, if it's in relation to a statutory process, but it's about communication and the fact that you've been promised a callback and that callback didn't happen, that's about keeping your promise. It's not necessarily about the delivery of a statutory service. So no, I don't is the short answer, because that's not something we've really looked into. But I think that would be a takeaway as to what actually is about a statutory service and the delivery of it, rather than how we communicate and whether it's a staff, all of the various themes that one can have a complaint about. We have data on the service areas, whether it's planning, whether it's highways, this, that, and the other, but we don't actually have specific data on the delivery of statutory processes. So it's a good takeaway for me. Thank you.
So I was alarmed on page 25 in the report to see that ourselves, we've written a report, that we have a tremendously large increase in the amount of money paid out as, I want to say reparations, I don't know the official word, to make it up to people that we have failed. And obviously the majority of that is within the SEND area, and almost half of it is one particular case. It seems to me that there's been a bit of an ongoing issue where we are not following our statutory duties in that area, and we have a large number of complaints as a result of it, and a large number that are upheld as a result of it. What are you now going to be doing in regards to ensuring this goes down and doesn't keep increasing as it does? Because I think, was it about £75,000 to £80,000 in total we paid out, which is a lot of money in a year.
No, thank you. Really good point again. So in terms of the 74,000 was what the Ombudsman had recommended that we pay. In one particular case, the complainant has refused to accept the payment. So the actual amount paid was consistent with previous years. But in terms of findings, the expectation was that we pay the higher sum. So yes, in terms of a figure, it has gone up significantly. To answer your question, complaints have come down quite a large amount in 24, 25. We've seen about a 20% decrease in SEN-related complaints across the piece, funnily enough. Well, not funnily enough, but we are seeing an increase in complaints across the directorates. Again, apart from SEN, the trend is that that's actually going down. The Ombudsman's approaches, there's fewer of them. Their guidance in terms of remedy is a benchmark, and it's there. So we're preempting outcomes. So we're doing what we can. If we know that there's an issue, again, it comes back to doing the Ombudsman's job for them. We're trying to do that through the complaints process. But it comes back down to a motto I use a lot about telling the truth and telling it early. I think the message is, if we know there's a problem, let's get that message out there. Most people are really reasonable, and if they're kept in the loop and they know what's going on and they feel listened to, the complaint probably won't come in. People take to the complaints process because they feel that they've run out of other options. So, yeah, I think we can feel encouraged. I hopefully sat here in a year's time, all things considered, and telling you a much better story about the financial outgoings. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to highlight two parts there from that response. the paying out the normal amount we do, because one, they haven't taken it, but they haven't taken it because they're taking us to court for more. And so it seems likely that we're going to pay that or more. So I think that has to be included in the figure as a takeaway. You said there that what you've reported here is the amount paid out due to the Ombudsman upholding the complaint and saying we have to. How much have we paid out ourselves for complaints to stop them escalating that far, as preempting the Ombudsman's decision? Because this is where we didn't think we were in the wrong, and the Ombudsman's then said, actually, we are. So how much have we paid out in response to complaints pre-Ombudsman?
No, thank you. A really good question. Across the directorates, I think Children's Services, SEN, are the only people that are actually recognising that the likely outcome will be a financial one. I'd need to get the figure as a takeaway and provide you with that. I have got the figures for how much we pay in relation to non-ombudsman related financial remedies. Place, I think there was one planning related complaint where we took some action along those lines, but more often than not, we're getting it right. And as I say, I think it's unfortunate that the SEN figures kind of swell the numbers. And I've said this morning, if we could get SEN right, Dorset Council's record with the Ombudsman's incredible and something to be very proud of.
Fantastic. I think that is a testament to the work that your team have enabled through the learning that you take from it. I think there's an excellent piece in here about the learning that's taken from a lot of them. I would be interested, and I think it's something that we should probably delve into, because it kind of feels on the agenda that we're looking at all complaints and the amount paid out for complaints, but actually these are only the ones that we were proved wrong by the Ombudsman, or found to be in the wrong by the Ombudsman. And I think it'd be really useful, maybe another piece of work. We want to look at the service interruption anyway as part of it and how those are categorised, and maybe that at the same time could cover the total amounts paid out over the council as a whole in terms of reimbursing people in complaints. Is that something that we'd be happy to do in the future? Or am I often looking at members to see if anyone's going, no, please don't do that? Are we happy to do that in the future? Is that possible?
If I can just come in on that, yeah, absolutely. So the data I've got anyway, so it's just more than happy to do that. And I think it's really important to stress, 9 times out of 10, the Ombudsman will say an apology is sufficient. It's not, the complaints process it shouldn't be about financial remedies unless we've really got it wrong. That's very much the exception. So an apology is normally sufficient for complaints.
Absolutely. So does anybody else wish to comment from the committee? Yeah, go for it, Rody.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Andy Skeets, Westmore's End, Three-Legged Cross. I'm new to Scrutiny, so you might have to just bear with me a little bit, but I just spend most of my life as a quality, health and safety and environment manager, so I'm used to some of the data. But one of the things that when I was looking through that I saw, or I think I see, is the fact that year on, the actual percentages, for instance, on timescales, have not really changed or reduced. The justified complaints are very much the same, about 8 or 9% as you go through the report, and the part justified complaints are equally the same sort of level. So in the environment that I've always worked in terms of quality and quality management and management as a whole, when you have problems, you usually set targets and objectives to overcome those problems and reduce or impact upon what's actually going on. Now, maybe I'm not seeing the whole of the picture, or there's a lot of data there, so forgive me if I've scanned over it too quickly and missed. But I don't see that side, that cutting edge of improvement based on your analysis of complaints, and in fact, as you did mention, which I was very pleased to hear, compliments as well. So I can see you taking that on board. So am I just missing it? Are the targets and objectives there? Have they been set by the powers that be within our organisation? Can you tell me that?
Now, thank you. As I've understood the question, in terms of targets, there's very few categories that we set a target for. I don't think there's an optimum number of complaints. I think we should invite complaints, accept the challenge, and if there's an increase in complaints, I don't think that necessarily means there's a reduction in service. I think it means that people are using the facilities available to them, people who are feeling empowered to express their opinions, and we get the opportunity to learn lessons. I think the key figures for me are the fact that the learning numbers are still really high from complaints. The timescales are actually improving. There's a breakdown by directorate in here. I know you go blob crazy after a while because there's so many coloured blobs in the report, I'm sorry, but I think what it does do is it tells you a little bit about the trends within the directorates. Some of the timescales are statutory, some of the timescales aren't, depending on which directorate and which complaints policy it's in. So it's a very detailed report. The optimum number in terms of timescale, yeah, we'd want all of them to be on time, but realistically, it's not always possible. We aspire to perfection, of course we do, but we don't aspire to no complaints and all in time. We aspire to providing a fit-for-purpose means for people to make their concerns known, for us to enter them into a process, and then to ultimately be tested via the Ombudsman. I think that the success story here is only 5%, sorry, 5 individual cases rather. 5 individual cases were upheld in place, which is an extraordinary figure, and one we should be very proud of. I think it would be wrong to set a target of none, because I'd wonder how robust we were being in our processes. That would probably feel a little bit like a smokescreen. So I'd rather we have some figures and some data that tell us what's gone wrong and where and what we've done about it and what the action is and what the value's been from it.
I'm sorry, I'm slightly confused. Sorry, and this is the way I think. I'm very black and white. It appears that what we're scrutinising is just the Ombudsman's overturned complaints rather than just complaints in general, because the complaints in general information isn't actually entirely in there. And we're looking at the whole of the authority, not just place. So actually, it's more than 5, and I don't think the question was about reducing the number of complaints or reduce the amount that the Ombudsman's enforced. I think that was the case, but I will hand back over.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My point was when I read through it, I could see systematically 1 year after another, over a period of three years or 3 courses, that there was no impact or reduction as an overall percentage. So irrespective of where the area is or what the performance is, we are systematically, almost always, 18 to 20% late. We are we're having complaints justified at the level of 8 or 9%. We are part justified complaints 9 or 10%, and that's remaining the same time on, time on. So I would expect a corporate body or team, portfolio holders, whatever leader, to be attacking that and setting a target and saying, as an overall, we can't pick on one particular area. I understand what's said, but we should be looking towards reducing our timescales overall by a percentage, irrespective of service, wherever the problem might have been. And we do that by acting upon the complaints, making sure that we take action which is effective enough to stop that problem happening again. Therefore, eventually you get a reduction in the percentages. And that's what I don't see. And maybe I'm just being slightly naive because I am new to this area. I'm used to industry where if I presented these figures to my MD as quality manager, you'd be saying, what the hell are you going to do about it? What's gone wrong? We must put some resources in here to put this right. And that's what I'd like to see. If I was scrutinising something, I want to see some end product for what we're doing, and I want to see a reduction, and I want to see on board us taking responsibility for what we're delivering and reducing the impact of errors and reducing the percentages overall. That's, I hope that makes it clear.
Yeah, I think that does make it clear, and we've already heard that there aren't any the goals or aspirations set for it. But actually, this is where we can feed back. And if that is a feeling, we can say we think it would be good if the Cabinet thought about finding a way of reducing these, and that actually we would like to see a reduction in the percentage of upheld complaints by the Ombudsman. Because trying to change the number of complaints we receive, I don't think that's feasible. I think, as you said, and actually receiving complaints we want, because that is learning processes, but them being upheld by an Ombudsman when we haven't dealt with it beforehand, I think that is something we should try to reduce. I think that's something that would be nice if we could. I'm seeing if anyone's going to shake their head wildly. Does any other cabinet member want to speak, or should we start wrapping up a bit of a end to this? Okay, so, Ray, go for it.
Yeah, before we move on to summary, can I, for the benefit of the people that aren't here and don't have the benefit of this report in front of them, can I just say the one thing that I find most attractive of this report is where we've got complaints, you then put in the actions that we've then taken to try and alleviate those complaints. And I think it's important that the general public don't just look at this and say, this is all about complaints. We are on a learning curve on the complaints process, always will be, because each complaint will be different. So I've got to take my hat off to you and say congratulations on the fact that we are addressing the complaints and coming up with remedies for them going forward. I'd just like to, if you don't mind, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that, scrutiny, you often focus on the negatives and what can be improved. And I think it's really important that Ray has highlighted the excellent work and outcomes that have come from this. So please don't take that away. And Place has done, as you've said, an amazing job. You said it a few times. That's excellent. So we're going to note the report because that's our duty here. We're not actually, there's no recommendation to make as such, but we can still make one back. I would be looking along the lines, I'm looking to see if people nod or shake their heads, that we're looking for a reduction in complaints upheld by the Ombudsman, and we'd like some assurance that the systemic issues in SEND improve. I think that seems pretty fair. There's no set stones. Councillor Tuck, please do come in.
Just a small point. Is it possible to get some peer review data from other similar councils on the number of complaints that they see and that go to the Ombudsman and that are upheld? So at least we can say, well, you know, we're the best in the country, or conversely, we're not the best in the country in handling these things. And it would be very interesting to see where we sit in a league table. Thank you.
I think that's excellent. I think in the future, that is something that I'm sure we'll just get a big nod that, yes, we can do that in the future. Is that a yes or no? Can you do that in the future? I'm looking for a nod or a shake. Is that something that can be? Yes, it can. Fantastic. So in the future, asked to have that information included into there, and also the general complaints as a coverall, I think, and the general amount paid out in the future on it. So it's a full agenda rather than just that part. And I think that then covers that item. It's done. We've noted it, put our recommendation forward. Everyone happy? Thank you very much. So we will now move to item 11, which is a nice, fun one. It is for me at least. I really enjoy this one. Natural Environment, Climate and Ecology Progress Report. So fantastic. I'll hand straight over to Anthony and his team and Connor to lead it.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll be introducing this report. I'll take it as read that everybody's read it. It's out there in the ether. Anybody can read it. There's also 2 appendices which contain a load of data and a quite cool preview of the dashboard, which is quite exciting. There are 5 slides I'm going to be going through just to highlight the main points, and Carl has just shared them, I say. But beforehand, I'd like to thank the authors, which are Anthony Littlechild and Connor Pearson, who are sitting to my right, and Carl, who's online and manning the slides. If we could keep questions to the end, please, and then we'll attempt to answer them. So I'll just go through the slides as it is. There's a bit of a preamble in the first one. So just to make it clear, this is the second of our biannual progress reports for 2024. It's a quantitative report, which is the progress on our emissions trajectory and performance against our current emissions targets to date. Obviously, it covers the new data is for the last year. It does not provide a qualitative description of the programme delivery, which is the subject of July's report. So we reported on it earlier this year, and there'll be another one next year to this committee. As you can see, there's three pillars of our progress at the bottom, our focus. So the net zero, nature recovery and adaptation on the screen, listed as climate change / carbon neutral Dorset. So this report gives greater emphasis to the top one, to net zero, owing to our present data limitations and ongoing work to develop strategies for the latter two, which should refine our future approach to monitoring. So the ongoing development of the local nature recovery strategy for Dorset, which we're leading on with BC Pearce Partners, will strengthen future reporting on nature, which is the second on the list there. And public consultation on that strategy is due to launch in February. Similarly, forthcoming development on climate resilience assessment and adaptation strategy should enable us to incorporate climate forecasts and risk assessments into future reporting. So this is things like flood, the fact that Weymouth might disappear into the sea in the next 10 years, that sort of thing. Not that I want to worry anybody. So that's we're going to concentrate on the top one on that list. So when we go to the next slide, I'll highlight the central points that the report makes on our emissions trajectory as a county and as a council. So this is a very simple graph which shows the dotted line is the trajectory that was basically agreed several years ago. And the full line is basically our progress to date against that. So as you can see, it dropped quite a bit, possibly quite down to COVID as well. And then we've essentially flatlined. And that is literally what the graph shows. So as you can see, we've now crossed the dotted line, so we're currently off our trajectory target. I hope that's clear to everybody. So if we go on to the next slide, please, Carl. So that's similar data, but broken down. So the top line, which is the sort of yellowy, orangey thing, is essentially the same graph as in the previous slide. So that's the total and our current trajectory, you see, and we're behind target. But the green line is essentially us as the council, and it's the bit we can influence directly. So as you can see, that's gone down, went up a bit, and then it's going down again. So our performance against that is better. However, the bottom line, which is the bit we don't have any direct control over, that's basically going up, as you can see, which when you combine it with the green line, ends up with the yellow line. So the underlying trend for us as a council is going down, and it's fallen year on year, apart from the slight blip in the middle there. But the challenge for us is our indirect emissions. So these are the things we don't control. Emissions associated with things like travel and commuting and highways materials, for instance, are creeping upwards. So people drive, we can't stop them driving. To some extent, year-on-year changes in some of these areas need to be taken with a pinch of salt, as they could be sensitive to large annual changes in levels of activity. For example, road maintenance activity. So if you do a load of repairs, that counts to our carbon cost. And they also mask the importance and effectiveness of our interventions to reduce carbon intensity on highways activity, without which they would actually be higher. More challenging areas where there's not just an annual leap, but a general trend upwards, which is worrying, such as staff travel, emphasise the need and the importance of having things like the forthcoming work travel plan, which is in the pipeline and will appear soon. So if we go on to the next slide, which there we go. So this is a breakdown. I'm not going to go through each line in each pillar, but it's obviously a histogram which details various things such as the buildings, or business mileage, or fleet mileage, various other things. I'm not going to read them all out. If you look down at the breakdowns of sources, it also gives a bit of extra nuance. So that's basically, though our total operational emissions for the last few years have been broadly flat, that doesn't mean that our interventions aren't actually being effective. This is actually exactly the opposite. They're creating a downward pressure that's preventing them from actually rising. Notably, relative to 2019-20, our buildings emissions have combined, and there's a few of them you'd have to look at to combine them, have reduced by 42%. So office waste is reduced by 66%, and street lighting by 37%. So that's things like replacing the bulbs by LEDs, for example. So this is significant as it has effectively prevented emissions from rebounding to pre-COVID levels. So in a nutshell, our total emissions remain flat over the last few years, but although they are that, it masks the success of our interventions in keeping them down, particularly for our direct emissions, which remain on target. All areas have much further to go, but more action is needed, especially to stem the trending rise in our indirect emissions. And so the final two slides is direct. Go back again. Sorry, you want to go back one? There we go. So that's so that's direct versus indirect. No, we got one. There we go. So I'm on the right slide. So these are the total emissions of the county. One of the officers can probably explain, but basically this is data we get from externally. So there's actually a 2-year lag, which is why, as you can see in the slide, it only goes up to 2022, and the dark line. Obviously, we're off trajectory as well. So in the year to 2022, our emissions fell by around 5.6%, which was slightly more than the national average, and we're down by just over 13% compared to our baseline year of 2017. Longer term, they're down by over 37% since 2005. So the main takeaway here is that following the post-COVID rebound in 2021, we remain off our target trajectory, but that in 2022, the trajectory started coming down again in the right direction and even fell to levels below that seen during lockdown. So that means hitting our interim 2025 target of 36% will be difficult, as we're currently on track for about 28 or 29%. And I'll just add that obviously we're in the budget process. There's things we can do as part of the budget, such as changing the fuel that our fleet uses, for example, which will, let's be honest, will actually cost us more. But, if I have anything to do with it, and I'm trying very hard to put my oar in as portfolio holder for climate and environment, bits of the budget will require investment, and I'm keen to make sure that happens, because actually sticking the new diesel equivalent, HVO, into our fleet will drastically cut our carbon targets emissions. So I'm keen to make sure that happens, and well, I guess just watch the space and see what the budget has, but that's what I'm planning to do. So if there's any questions, obviously we're open to.
Thank you. So I won't go to the Cabinet members, you've already gone to it, so I'll go straight to non-committee members. Councillor O'Leary.
Yes, thank you very much. I often feel when this council talks about climate change, that we often feel like we're playing a bit of United Nations as opposed to Shire Council. The leader said there's a danger of Weymouth being underwater in several years. As a lifelong Weymouth resident, can I ask how spending £3.5 million of taxpayer money, which is the equivalent of over half our entire highways budget, on carbon reduction to get to net zero, has prevented Weymouth so far from danger of going underwater, given the fact the UK, let alone leafy green Dorset, makes up a tiny proportion of global emissions?
Would you like to answer that? Fantastic.
The simple answer is that Dorset's actions happened. We're in a trajectory which is quite frankly terrifying. We've gone over the 1.5 degrees target already. And it's also why we're going to be spending an awful lot of money in Weymouth and other seaside towns in our patch building up the walls. Sea levels are rising, Antarctic is melting, Arctic is melting. There's no getting away from that. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be reducing carbon emissions. We all have to do our bit, and endorse it, we will do.
Councillor, do you want to come back on that?
I don't doubt what you just said. The answer is that we're doing this on the taxpayer money. Surely a personal commitment from people that are that concerned about this will be to change in their own lives, such as giving up foreign travel, meat-based products, etc., as opposed to spending taxpayer money on trying to change the world. We are a Shire Council. As I say, we're spending over half of the equivalent of our highways budget on this, and I just think that we're going down a rabbit hole here. We've got 3.5 million has been spent, 4 million this year, and then 2.5 million allocated in 2026 and 2027. I'm just trying to see in the big scheme of things, that's a lot of money to this council, but in terms of global emissions, it's a very, very small amount of impact. Does our impact meet the amount of money we're spending?
I don't think you need to shoehorn a question into that at the end. I think we are going very clearly into the realms of a political discussion there. And I think maybe that's saved for a discussion during the budget with the new budgetary amounts. Today we are scrutinising the effectiveness of what we've done so far. And so I'm really looking for questions on this paper as opposed to the going forward. Councillor O'Leary, I will give you another chance. Yes, please do.
I didn't actually get an answer to my first question. I'm still not sure what this council has done goes in the way of preventing Weymouth, for instance, going underwater. What actual impact has what we've done on the total global emissions?
Would you like to answer our impact on the total global emissions?
I'd just like to point out first that we're not a shire county, we're a unitary council. Just to clarify, there is 2 councils in Dorset. I have no idea. This paper doesn't cover the quantity of our effect on global climate change. I don't know if one of our officers want to make it, but I suspect we don't know, is the answer. We can probably quantify it on national basis, but in terms of global, I don't know about the numbers. Anybody else want to pick that up?
If you want, I happen to know. So Dorset Council is roughly 1% of Dorset. Dorset's roughly 1% of the country. And the country is roughly 1% of the world. So it's, 1% of 1% of 1% is what we're trying to actually work on. But I do think let's get back to the paper at hand and the information in the paper. Does anybody else not on the committee wish to comment on that? Councillor Parry, you're signifying.
Thank you. And those who've been around the council chamber long enough will know my pet interest is, of course, the use of hydrogen as an alternative fuel, of which this council has invested considerable sums of money in the plant at Camford. And I know that I have long said that I myself would switch to a hydrogen-powered vehicle, apart from the small problem, the fact that I can't get it refuelled anywhere outside of the M25 currently. So I'd like to be able to get some understanding from the leader if, when we talk about alternative fuels for our vehicles, whether that will include hydrogen and any plans to bring hydrogen refuelling to Dorset. Perhaps Dorset Council will be trialling it. Maybe that's a slight overview question thrown in there as well.
I think from that, before I go, I think what we're looking at is what technologies are we looking at going into in the future as part of the hardest part of the graph to do, as you said earlier, with things we don't directly influence, but we can have an indirect effect on. I think, is that what I'm taking from that?
Yes, also, and I'd also be appreciative of some indication of our, if you like, our benefits of our investment into the hydrogen plant at Camford.
Yeah, that's part of the capital report that's in here, so that makes sense. Yep.
Okay, so I'll be a bit political, I guess, if I may. And my personal view is that hydrogen has little or no use for general transport in terms of cars. I know Councillor Bryan will disagree with me. One of the issues, and one of the reasons why you can't get hydrogen outside the M25 is, weight for weight, it's got a very low calorific value compared to petrol. So, one petrol tanker you don't need about 15 hydrogen tankers. So that there is an issue of distributing it. It has its place in industrial processes. There are potential opportunities, as I think most of us are aware, in Portland for using hydrogen storage. If the Celtic wind turbines take off, and there's potentially other floating offshore wind turbines maybe in the Middle Channel, Portland could become the place where the power lands, and therefore we can generate green hydrogen and store it and potentially distribute it. So hydrogen has its uses in my own view. I'm not aware of what exactly the council is doing, so I'll hand over to Mr. Littlechild to answer the rest of it.
I think beforehand, I'm going to make a comment here. I was going to wait till after the meeting, but I'm going to make a comment because we have gone into the realms of a political discussion instead, and this is the exact reason that officers present normally on here. I was hoodwinked today because it says very clearly in everything that's set up who was presenting, and then the cabinet member comes in. Really, this is to ask officers questions about the actual information in the papers, not to talk about the political validity of things going forward and that. We are scrutinising the current policies. So if I could remind everybody to really try to stick to those. And Anthony, can you comment on what we intend to get out of our investment within the hydrogen that we have already made?
Thank you, Chair. So I'm Anthony Littlechild, I'm a Sustainability Team Manager. And I was also involved I'm still involved in delivery of the Low Carbon Dorset programme, which was the programme which helped with the Camford hydrogen project. So Dorset's role in that was, through Low Carbon Dorset, to provide some advice and to help to marry up various bits of investment, some of which came from the LEP and some of which came via Dorset Council, but came from the EU. So it was EU funding and LEP loan funding, I think, that went into the Camford scheme. Part of that, it's a very small project, but it was a sort of trial project, quite novel, the only one in the southwest, the only one lower than Birmingham, I believe. And one of the outcomes of that was to try and use that as a bit of a demonstrator of what could happen, what the potential is, learn what some of the cost benefits might be in terms of production, how you could use it, what they could do with it. So there is possibility there to sort of try and build on some of the learning from that project, look at what opportunities there are for something around that in the future. I think going back to the transport question in terms of what are we talking about in terms of alternative fuels, I guess the question is, it's open. It depends what comes along in the future. It depends what role hydrogen has in the future and when hydrogen vehicles, if they come forward, what might be forward. But at the moment, what the paper's talking about is HVO fuel, which is an available sort of drop-in fuel that replaces diesel, but much lower carbon intensity. Hope that sort of answers the question.
Did you want to come back to that? Are you happy with that?
Well, my observation, Chair, is that, there are production-ready hydrogen cars that have been in circulation for some years now, okay, but we have none of them in our fleet. We have never had any down here for trial and evaluation. We have an investment, so we have, or certainly been heavily engaged in a facility that produces hydrogen. It strikes me that we are kind of missing a trick here, and we should see some linking up between the various bits of the Transport and the Place Directorate that could help us to be part of this evaluation process.
Thank you. I think from that comment, what we're looking for is an assurance that you are still actively looking at every available technology to judge them all on their merits. And that is, yeah, you're happy with that? Fantastic. So does any other non-committee member wish to speak? No, then I'm going to jump in and give an example of the sort of question I'm hoping to get. So at highways materials, we've made a progress of 7%, but we're aiming to get to 40 by 2025. So what's the plan that's radically different to go from 7% to 40% in the next year? Because we have failed to meet our targets as planned. This isn't sadly a success story we've had some success, but not the level that we aimed for, wanted, or promised. So what are we doing to make up those gaps?
Thank you, Chair. So you're absolutely right. The reporting year for 2025 is actually the year we're in. So we're already partway through that year in terms of the stuff that we're already doing. So there are some, they're sort of set out in the paper, but there are some ongoing programs of work which haven't yet completed. There are a few things which still will come through and give us some carbon savings, things around building retrofit, LED street lighting, some of the other areas that we're looking at. We've already taken steps to look at trialling HVO fuel on one of the depot sites, I believe, and we're looking at trying to see how we could do that perhaps next year across the whole fleet, which will then bring us back in. So in the longer term, we're trying to look at what programs of work do we need to develop on our operational program in terms of trying to get us back on track, even if we miss the 2025 target, get us back on track, and in particular, how can we achieve the next milestone target of 2030, which is again the next level down. So we're already doing things like reviewing buildings for PV, solar PV, more solar PV programs, that's underway. Looking at surveying a number of our buildings for energy efficiency retrofit projects, looking at the HVO fuel. We're looking at options for how do we reduce travel.
Sorry, I think this is great, but you're talking about things like the estates, which is already on 42% of the 40. So that's great. That's really good. If you want street lighting, that's on 38% of the 40. The specific question I was asking about is highways materials, because that was 7 out of the 40, which if that's reporting for next year, So that should have already been done at this point, if you're saying that this is the year we're reporting about?
Good evening, Chair. Matthew Fires, I'm actually the Director of Highways, so I'd like to answer that one if I may. Dorset Council is actually leading in its class over innovative ways of road resurfacing, and what you're referring to is actually low energy asphalt. Because if we can produce more low energy asphalt, we reduce our carbon emissions by 15% within Dorset Highways. We have been recognised of using alternative materials throughout, and if I may, the previous portfolio holder for Highways is aware that he was very passionate about changing the materials that we have used, and Councillor Andrews is aware of our commitment towards that. I think it's also important from a Highway Authority perspective, the use of vehicles, moving to electric. We are recognised through the Transforming Cities Fund that we've invested substantial monies in alternative delivery models as well. We're one of the first highway authorities to install a first solar-powered asphalt storage hotbox in our depots. But also we know that we have to continue to improve. The highway industry is being challenged about its emissions, and I can assure you that we will do everything we can in the future. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. So what I'm taking from that, to make sure I understood properly, you said, because I'm really trying to focus on a single issue at this point, because I think that's better for this, because a lot of them are covered, exceptionally we've done very well on. The highways materials is currently on 7%. You say that if we can move to this low carbon, so we haven't already, I'm taking from the if, that'll be another 15%, which takes us to 22. That still puts us just over halfway to what we need to be at. So what I'm looking for is there a budgetary request coming forward to enable us to expedite that growth to get us to the 40% we thought we'd already be running now?
If I may, we are actually dependent on funding from the Department of Transport for our road resurfacing programme. That will then dictate what we can do for the future, which is linked to our asset management strategy. It's very kind of you to say whether we would like some more budget to improve our highways. So the answer is always yes. I'm just looking at Aidan that's up behind me. And the reason being is that the Highway Authority has to maintain the assets that we have and it can't deteriorate. What we're looking to do is actually invest in new technology to put in more low temperature asphalt in Dorset. And that's with our partners Heidelberg. So we will be coming back for requests on the budgetary input. Thank you.
And yeah, absolutely aware that Highways England put a large amount of the budget in there, but I'm also aware that in the past, previously, substantial multi-millions of pounds have been put in to top that up and to help. And I think that the council made a commitment to a 2040 target. We're now expecting to fail to meet our 25, and we never want to expect to fail. So let's really highlight what we can do to stop us failing and have a discussion on that as a political discussion at the budget. So that's the sort of thing I'm looking for. Anybody else got any want to make any questions on this? Fantastic, go for it.
Other one, right. I'm sorry, Councillor Brenton, Upton and Litchett. Just scanning through this report, which I've read a couple of times, it does seem that we're ignoring the sort of elephant in the room, or possibly the cow in the room, in that, yes, we know we can't tell farmers what to do. That's up to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, by sounds of it. But what actions have we taken with, I know with what we've taken with the county farms, it's all very nice, but we haven't actually encouraged or provided grants or helped even our own county farms to cover their slurry pits so as to cut down on methane escaping. Grants are available, but we've been quite slow about it. And also so I just wonder what other, looking forwards, what's in the forward plan for this? I mean, I have driven a tractor that is run on methane, which was collected from a slurry pit. So you have a sort of circular economy in a farm. The cows poop, you collect this methane, you put it in the tractor. Yes, it does need refueling slightly more often than diesel, but that should surely be something we should be promoting or looking at in more detail. Admittedly, tractors don't go very far, so it's not like you could do that with HGV vehicles in the same way. But there's no mention in there we're just assuming that farming emissions will pretty much flatline. And surely we should be aiming at those. Even if we can't influence the whole county, we could set an example on our own estate and therefore let that go out. We do occasionally have forward in farming conventions where they bring in the methane tractors and the remote controlled electric ones and things like that. We don't seem to have done that for us in Dorset, which I think is a bit of excuse me, but I've got to go.
Absolutely, yeah. Can I hand over to, has Anthony got any comments on that? Oh, Nick, sorry.
I totally take the point you've made. So there has obviously been some work going on around some of the projects, such as the Farming in Protected Landscapes, which does provide grants and advice. Lots of work going on around the local nature recovery strategy in terms of engaging wider farmers with discussions around sustainable farming, etc. But you're absolutely right. There are opportunities for doing more, and there are opportunities through county farms potentially. Some of those are being thought of and discussed, and so on.
Just a bit more information. So, Councillor Brenton probably knows this already, but following a visit to one of our county farms quite a few months ago, I took the decision to scrap the farmers liaison panel because it became clear that we'd basically, as a council, been failing our tenants historically, way back from, not Dorset County Council days, I think it's fair to say. And we've reformed it with a committee with more powers, and the intention is to encourage our farmers to act more sustainably. Look at grants for basically reinforcing barns so you can stick PV on them, using our land where it's not possible or economical to farm bits of it for biodiversity net gain. There's lots of programs and lots of opportunities. And it's also recognising that the fact that we haven't been giving our tenants very long leases, for example. So when they have things to do, such as covering slurry pits, they can't actually access the grants because they need to basically match fund. And with leases that only last 3 or 4 years, no bank is going to lend them their money. So we're looking at changing that. So the Assets Department under Tim Hume is actively investigating that. So we recognise that we haven't been managing the farm estate, but there are huge opportunities and we plan to utilise them.
Fantastic. Anybody else have anything? Councillor Tuck.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome this report. Things have been going reasonably well, and they were going reasonably well when Councillor Bryan had the portfolio. I think we're doing the right things. I've got one. Do I have to? So yeah, things have been going reasonably well. There are a couple of blips and interesting years that they happened in. But what I'm concerned about mainly is this is climate and nature emergency we declared. There is more to handling this than simply reducing our carbon emissions. We are looking at, and if we look in Spain at the moment and we look at the rest of the world over the last few years, and we look at this country over the last few years, and in Dorset over the last few years, there has been an awful lot of extreme weather events. And we need to be, as well as looking at how to prevent further CO2 emissions, which is fine, we're not the only people producing those. We need to encourage others, we need to do what we can, we need to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. But we also need to look at the growing instabilities in our climate system, in our weather system, and the two swing one into the other. There's also potential changes in agriculture. A change of a degree or 1.5 degrees can prevent farming of certain crops and encourage farming of other crops. we may end up with a lot more grapes being grown. And in fact, Dorset is a great grape place. And during Roman times, used to harvest a lot of grapes, which is excellent. But we need to involve more than simply carbon reduction. We need to involve what are we going to do in terms of prevention of flooding. So we need ditches and roads and gullies and things kept clear so water can drain away. We need areas of land that can be used as attenuation areas to stop rivers just forcing their way down and flooding our coastal towns. There's lots of work we need to do on that. And I'd like to see some work on those aspects brought in to this natural environment, climate and ecology report, because I think they're important. We have lost 1.5 degrees. We're not going to get that back. We might even hit 2 degrees. We might hit more. The latest thing I saw was potentially 3 degrees, and that's going to mean significant changes. We need to prepare to address those rather than keep trying to put our finger in the dike, because the finger needs to go in the dike, but we need to do something else as well. Okay, that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. It's one of those very rare occasions that we are thinking exactly alike. I was disappointed with the dashboard that's drafted on here, because it does just focus really on the CO2 emissions. And as you say, we have the quantitative report, which is the qualitative report once a year, which is very difficult to scrutinise because qualitative data always is harder to scrutinise. But in the actual metrics for this quantitative report, which for me is the big scrutiny of the year for this, doesn't cover a lot of those extra things, like what are we doing in terms of attenuation ponds? What are we doing in terms of food security for extreme weather events? What are we doing to prepare for that as it's happening? So is that the sort of thing, just looking for a nod of the head on, in the future, could those sort of things be looked at to be incorporated going forward into the metrics? Is that a yes or a... So normally it would be officers that respond to this. I just, you can, but normally it would be officers.
I am the lead on this, and I did point out with the first slide. So what Councillor Took is referring to is what in the first slide is referred to as resilient Dorset. So we are working on a development of a climate resilience strategy and an adaptation strategy. So it's adaptation. So it is not in this report, and I apologise if you expected it to be in, but in future we will report on it.
You will. Fantastic. That's great. All it was is that's great. To answer what question? We're only asking for that to be included in the future. I don't think there's any merit in us offhandedly trying to scrutinise it now without the data beforehand, because this is scrutiny. We're scrutinising things. The data's not there beforehand. We can't scrutinise it. There was no specific question on it. It was in the future. Can that be included? Because I'm sure you're doing all the work, and that's great, but let's have that in there. Yeah? Is that okay? Fantastic. So any other committee member wish to speak? Ray, go for it.
Yeah, sorry about this, but I'm back on my passion again, as people will be aware over the last few years. I was pleased in the report on 1.7 to see the Nature Recovery Dorset Network mentioned, but I find it quite misleading because it says it was launched in late August 2024. The document that is attached to it shows that summer 2023 was the formation of the steering group. July 2023, Dorset Council was appointed the responsible authority. In other words, we took the lead on it. And in autumn 23 to spring 24, we had several advisory groups meet. That should have been included in the basis of the report, so the general public don't think we've suddenly sprung this out of nowhere. So I just thought I'd raise that point. If I can go on to a few others, if you don't mind.
Yeah, that's a point of clarity.
Yep. If we look at 3.1 on page 77, the latest available year of data, and I understand I fully understand, having worked with you on this, the difficulty of getting current data, but the question I would ask is, when are we going to see more up-to-date data, because the quote's already been used tonight. The elephant in the room is the climate issue. None of us know which way it's going. There's a lot of speculation as to which way it could go, that way or that way. We don't know. But when are we going to get more accurate data on which the portfolio holder can make his decisions on the way forward? Because the one frustration I had when I was in that seat is that the data is not available. And I still find that frustrating on your behalf, Nick, because it is difficult. So I'd like to know when we're going to see that data. And then on 3.3, we're comparing areas, but are we comparing on a level playing field? Because we are very much a rural area where people drive a lot more. Transport has to be move the product around. We've already mentioned our farming community, and I'll go back to one item on that. We could help the farming community by providing them with the hydrogen they need for their vehicles. Sorry, Nick, because JCB produce a full range of hydrogen vehicles. They produce hydrogen buses. Can't have them in this area because we've got no hydrogen. And sorry to involve young Mr. Piles, he's now got a flinch. He and I had a conversation on this several years ago when we were talking about EV charging stations, hydrogen stations, because there has to be a package going forward that encompasses all fuels. I read the other day that somebody has developed an engine that works on a man-made fuel. I wish him all success, whoever he is. He's not named, because he'd probably get the biggest bid he could get from Shell or any other fuel manufacturer before I get into trouble on naming somebody. But I do feel that, I question whether we're being judged fair or we're judging ourselves fairly because we are a rural area. If I can go on.
You have to take them all at once at the end.
Yeah?
Or not?
Do you want to answer them as we go?
Yeah. So whichever's easiest for you, Anthony. Do you want to take them as they come, or do you want to do it at the end? Should we do it as they come? Do you want to comment on that one first? Fantastic.
So you've got three. I might bring in Carl at this point, but I think there's probably three questions there that you asked around the data. One which is why it's frustrating, it's only 2 years out of date. One which was the comparability of the data, and one was when are we going to get some annual data on the county-wide stuff. So I might pass over to Carl, but just before I do, it's a shared frustration across all local authorities and everyone else also. This data is provided at a national sort of level by Department for Energy and Net Zero. So there isn't an easy way of breaking this down, but this was part of the reason why the dashboard was actually brought forward through a previous discussion. But can I pass over to Carl, maybe answer those questions in more detail?
Thank you. Yeah, so I have said this a few times, that if officers are going to speak, they do need to be in the room, because for me specifically, because I half lip read, and so hearing it through the TV and trying to do it, it makes it very difficult. And I have made that very clear so we can try, but actually this is why I have said that anyone that's presenting needs to be in the room. So if Carl would like to try, but yeah, because I can't even get a good angle at TV from here.
Thank you, Chairman. My apologies for not being there present. I had not picked up on your request previously. So thank you. Thank you for raising that.
Sorry, your screen is tiny. I have no chance in the world of understanding what you're saying with the speakers in this room. Sorry, Carl. If there's any information you want to send that's really pertinent, please circulate that information afterwards to us. But sadly, we're not set up in here to have people from outside speaking in to us, if that makes sense. This is set up to broadcast out. Sorry, Carl.
Apologies, Chairman. Thank you.
Yeah.
So back to.
Okay, cool. Sorry, I wasn't sure if you're speaking or not. I really am very deaf, sorry. So, Anthony, did you want to say anything else on that one? No. I think we're happy with that one. We'll move to the next point.
Yeah. The next point I raised was on judging on rural against urban areas. It seems an unfair comparison, which is detrimental to us. Whereas I don't apologise for this. I'm very proud of the work we have done. We've got a long way to go. Councillor sat with me on the EAP panel that brought all this about. It was cross-party, and I thought that was important at that stage. And I just feel that this particular comparison could be unfair. So I'm asking whether you agree with that.
Thank you. That is a good point. You're absolutely right. The comparison that's done in here is a comparison of the data nationally across the different local authorities. The data that's produced is broken down by every local authority in the country. So it is possible to pick similar local authorities with which to compare ourselves if we wish to. And if that's something we want to do going forward, we could bring that forward. At the moment, we've just compared it to the national figures and the South West figures to give a bit of a feel of sort of direction.
Well, I haven't finished yet. Yep. I did warn Anthony. If I look at 4.1, obviously we allocated 10 million in the capital programme. 3.5 million has been spent on emission reducing projects. Great. That's what it was there for. 4 million has already been allocated for this year. I'd like to see a bit more detail on that if we can. And then 2.5 million is planned to be spent supporting programmes in 26, 27. And I'd like to know a little bit more of that. And the last one is you've been supplemented by over 24 million of external funding. I presume that's 19 million that we got from government plus 5 we got from other areas. Can you just confirm that that's true? Accurate, sorry.
If I can answer in reverse, you're absolutely correct. The 24 million was made up largely from the public sector decarbonisation scheme, which was about 18.2 million, and other bits of money, including things like shared prosperity funding and so on, which have gone, parts of which have gone towards the climate budget. If I can refer you to the Appendix A, I tried just very broadly to set out in Table 7 a breakdown of the projects that capital funding has gone towards. And I've tried to break it down fairly simply into completed projects, i.e. the ones that we've already done, underway projects, the ones that we're doing this year, so the 4 million this year, and the future 26, 27 projects. I haven't broken those down in any more detail, but that gives you a broad feeling of sort of the things that we've been doing. So it's things like street lighting LEDs, building retrofit, supporting the public sector decarbonisation programme, PV on our buildings, electric vehicle purchasing and electric vehicle infrastructure, pool cars, electric pool cars, fleet cars, and so on. So it sort of sets out there. Hopefully that's enough sort of detail.
Do you happen to have the page number that appendix is, just so we can find it quickly here to refer to? So it's the page before that. Here, there, capital spending.
Yeah, if I may, for future, and this is to all officers, if you're going to make a reference in the detail of the report, if you could say Appendix A on page so-and-so, I can't complain about it because I didn't put it, I didn't ask for it, and it was my seat. But I do think it's to make it easy for committee members to read, if you can have a reference to, so then we're not scurrying for it. But I can now see, yes, you've laid that out. I'm going to shoot myself because I missed it. So, not literally, by the way.
Yeah, please don't.
I saw some hands or looks of glee then when I said that, but no, you're stuck with me. But no, I'm a great believer in us investing to do things. I'm not sure how you're going to deal with it as the Cabinet. I'm probably going slightly offline, please bear with me, because there is only one thing that will make this programme swing, and that's money. And the likelihood of us getting it from central government at the moment is very limited from the things I'm hearing back, because they've got other things they're going to invest in. I was pleased, by the way, that they put some money into hydrogen, just to bring you back on hydrogen, young Nick. But I think it's important that we face a bit of reality going forward and manage expectations, because I think if we're not careful, the general public are going to lose faith in us on knowing what we're doing. And I know we know what we're doing, but we're restricted by money. But I mean, that's something that will have to be addressed going forward.
I actually have a question on that, if I can take over.
Please do.
So that was one of my questions that I wanted to ask was, as Nick pointed out earlier when he was going through all of the graphs, that actually we're doing okay at actually reducing it ourselves and kind of dealing with our in-house. There's stuff we do better on, but we're going in the right trajectory. But what's really throwing that off is the indirect data. The stuff done by other people. So what are we doing this year, or what have we already done and are going to continue to do in order to do that? Because I know we have had different groups that have done things for us and with us, but it's not having the outcome we want it to. So what are we doing currently, and how are we going to get that in line when we're reporting for this in 6 months' time?
Just to clarify, are we talking more about the sort of county-wide emissions, how we're actually dealing with those?
Yeah,
The
indirect numbers that were reported about, I think there were some graphs at the very start that Nick showed which had us within the yellow line and then the black line that actually has gone up, and actually that's gone the wrong way. So which, to me, if the graph's going the wrong way, it means that either what we're doing isn't right or we're not doing anywhere near enough of it. And so it's that I'm looking for you to comment on.
Thank you. So just to clarify, within that emissions footprint, if you like, for the council, on one of those slides it broke it down into the things that we have more direct influence over and the other things that we don't. In the package of the ones that we don't have as much influence over includes things like staff travel, so that's commuting and business travel, etc. Highways, which we talked about earlier in terms of things that were happening in terms of highways materials and some of those things. So I guess we talked earlier about the highways materials and all the work that's already going on around trying to reduce emissions from that side of things, and how that's affected by the amount of work that you actually do and the amount of funding you draw in from central government to do work. So obviously the more work you do, the more footprint you have. There's also things like the travel plan in order to try and look at how do we tackle staff travel. Things like by purchasing more pool cars, which we're currently in the process of doing in order to assist.
I think I've been unclear my question, sorry. I don't know if you could to put the slides back up again, but I think it's what the rest of Dorset is producing that's not within us. I don't think it's our other ones, it's the rest of Dorset's production that's gone up. I think that was a slide that was shown earlier, unless I read the slide wrong. Yes, specifically it was a black line, it was a graph that had the black line that went up. I think that might be the combined one, but it was the rest of Dorset one. I think it's a separate one. That,
County emissions, that's the one you want.
yeah, that one, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I guess there's a few things which we're doing. There's a lot of stuff we do obviously across the council which affects the emissions across the county in terms of things like travel, agriculture, etc. There are some specific things which we've been trying to do over the last few months and started to put in place in terms of some, for example, some greater engagement with things like town and parish councils, community organisations, public sector organisations, and schools. So trying to get some programmes of work going there in terms of encouraging others and supporting others to have a wider impact in their area. We've mentioned that we're doing some work around the resilience programme, which doesn't bring down the emissions, but it's another bit. It's important, matches together. Local nature recovery strategy, some of which will have carbon benefits related across. That bit of work, as we already mentioned, is sort of actively going on at the moment. We're also working on developing a local transport plan, which will obviously have huge impact across the county in terms of setting out the vision for a low carbon transport future. And there are other, I guess critically, there are lots of other strategic things that we're doing, strategic documents that we're producing across the council, which we must ensure that we sort of mainstream in, or that we properly integrate in concerns around climate, nature and resilience, particularly things like the local plan, for example, housing strategy, economic strategy, those sorts of areas, all of which can have a huge impact out across the wider county. So it's broadly recognised that, yes, we have a very small footprint as an organisation, but our wider reach in terms of our place setting strategy has a sort of much larger, usually thought of as around 30 or 40% of the county. Plus we have an even wider remit, if you like, in terms of our convening and organising and bringing people together to actually tackle some of these other areas.
I think that's fantastic, and I think it's really important that we highlight all the amazing work that not just your team but the whole council does with all those areas, because that is obviously the whole of Dorset is responsible for a lot more carbon than just us, and I think that's where we can have the biggest effect to actually change what could be happening in the future. And I think if we could find a way of somehow quantifying that to a level that could be in this report in the future, I think it's important to show that actually it's more important in some respects that we do that, because saving 2% for the whole of Dorset is a lot more than saving 10% of ours. And I think it's really important that we kind of bring that out somehow. And so thank you. I wanted you to speak on that, so thank you so much. Did you want to come back? You're welcome to. Yeah.
If I may, just on that last point, I mean, I think this is important. This is probably the point that Carl was going to make in terms of the data and the dashboard. So the national data is quite limited in terms of what it actually shows. And because it's 2 years behind, it's very difficult to actually show progress of what you're achieving. If we can get the dashboard working, it will draw in more readily available local data, which will be on hopefully a much quicker turnaround of information. So it won't necessarily just say, this is the carbon reduction, but it will enable you to monitor and measure your sort of direction of travel. So things like, how many electric vehicles have we brought forward? How many electric charge points are there? How much renewable energy is there in the county? How many houses have reached what energy standard? Those sorts of things, which will give us a potential bunch of metrics against which we can monitor progress on a county level, and again, help in terms of communicating what others can do and how we can all sort of contribute and play a part, I guess.
If I can just pick up something on this point. I can remember a conversation that you and I had probably a couple, 3 years ago now, when I'd been over to County Antrim to look at what was going on over there. And I came back and said, we need to have a facility where members of the public can contact somebody that doesn't have a biased opinion to give advice. And I do think we're missing an opportunity there to liaise better with the general public on, for instance, let's just take solar panels. To get advice on solar panels, you go to one of the distributors or the manufacturers. They have a biased opinion. I'd like to see whether there's not, and I did voice it to you, I'd like to have seen whether there's not something we could do as an advisory, and I was hoping we'd be using some of the 10 million, but unfortunately that's gone now, so Aidan, get your hands in your pockets and draw the money out. Because quite seriously, I think we've got to help get the public on our side, because at the moment, when I look at all the consultations that we do and the surveys that we do, climate change is still well down the list. And I'm sure some of the colleagues that have been on this path with me must feel exactly the same way. It's frustrating. So I'd like to think that in the non-too distant future, And I'm perfectly prepared to have this conversation, Nick, with you outside of the meeting on ways in which I feel we could be more helpful to the public without it costing us a lot of money. No, we can't advise people to go to X or Y, but what we can say to them, because we used to do it with low carbon Dorset, and this is where this idea came from. And I just think we should expand on that a little bit. Thanks for your patience, Chairman.
I think that's a suggestion that will be brought forward. Did you want to respond? You can if you wish to. Yeah, absolutely.
I think you're absolutely right. And obviously, we've got a number of programmes that are already running, which are starting in that sort of direction. So we have the Healthy Homes Dorset programme, which provides sort of free and impartial advice to residents on energy efficiency in their homes. We have the Low Carbon Dorset project currently run until March, which is helping organisations to sort of do that. So I totally agree with you. It's a question of making sure we carry on doing those things and more of them ideally, and how do we evolve that ideally in partnership with some of the other organisations that are also thinking about some of these things, some of the community organisations, community energy groups, etc., already starting to think, how do we encourage or support households and organisations to do stuff.
Thank you so much. I do hope that when the decision's made about low carbon Dorset's future, I hope it's seriously considered, because I think that actually, as I said earlier, it's important that we support everybody else. Does anybody else wish to have a question or have anything? I'll start wrapping up what I think the recommendations are from it, and please point out if there's something you want to add or you think I've got wrong. I think it is to have more metrics covering other areas that are important within the climate and ecology emergency that was declared in nature, so we can have more information, more metrics that we can scrutinise in the quantitative data side of things, and things like the extreme weather. I think it was all covered nicely earlier. And also, if we could find a way of including the work we're doing with other groups to influence the rest of Dorset, if we could find a way to do that, that would be really good as well. I think that's everything, and I think it's also to say thank you for all the work you have done. And I think we recognise that we're looking at the moment that we're failing to meet the targets, but we've made we're doing a lot, we're doing really well. Our amount of carbon that we're producing is going down. That is clearly shown. We've had some excellent success stories in there. Some stuff are above targets. And so I think it's recognised the success there. Hope that you can improve the bits that aren't as successful. And if you need anything else from us, please do let us know. I think everyone else is happy with that. Happy to take that as the recommendation? Yep. Super. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time for it. Really good as always. So now we will move to item 12. I'm going to preface this item. So this is the trial reduction in car parking charges. So it's to look at the success on it before it's then included or not included in the next budget setting process. When we are discussing this, we have a technological issue that if we go into exempt business, we cannot resume online the meeting online. So anyone that's watching elsewhere will then lose anything we do from resuming it. There will be talk to IT afterwards to see if in the future there's a workaround, but currently there isn't. So please do be aware that if we have to move to exempt, that would then only be us in the room afterwards. We are able to discuss the total figures in car parking in open session. What we cannot do is go down to individual car parks and their takings or the timings of collection or anything like that. So if we start to strain down that, to go that sort of direction, I'm going to be using, and I'm going to say Officer Matt Piles, officer, will wave frantically at me, and I will then I'll wave at you guys if necessary, or myself, to stop that train. And if we do need to go down there, do not let it stop us having that conversation, but we will have to pause, vote to go into exempt business, and then resume the conversation. Is everybody happy with that, how it will work for that? And we've got no visitors upstairs, so we won't need to check there. In which case, I will move straight over to Matthew to present the report. No, Mike is presenting the report, sorry. I was going on the list of who's presenting here.
Chair, I was just going to open up by saying Thankfully, I need to introduce myself. Councillor John Andrews from Sherborne East. I am the Cabinet Member for Place Services, which includes parking. The good thing about today's report is the data we've been able to retrieve. The foresight of the previous administration to make sure that all the council car parks were fitted with the new machines, which allowed payment by card, by app, or by cash, meant that we've got really good, accurate data now. There has been a little bit of a problem putting that data together because of the way the accounting system reads itself, and I'm sure Mr. Westwood, who is our parking services manager, will be able to explain that. But I'll now hand over to Officer Matt Piles, the director. The director.
How to put a director off before he presents a report. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. My name is Matthew Piles. Good evening. I am the Director of Highways and also for parking. The report in front of you, I'm going to take the members have read the report, and the reason is there are a lot of appendices and details that we will try not to stray into. However, we are coming back to talk to you about the trial of the reduced car park tariffs, which took place in 3 level 3 car parks, Weymouth, West Bay and Lyme Regis, between the 1st of July and the 31st of October. That was reported and requested by the Chair and Vice Chair of Scrutiny. Okay. This is about data, Chair, if I may. However, there are a number of factors that influence where people choose to park, weather in particular. And these factors actually include prices to stay in a car park or different locations in a setting. Chair, you asked me at the previous meeting a percentage of whether I would be able to enforce. Yes, 85%, Chair, if I remember right. It was 8, okay. I'm glad to say that we are within that variance of 263 for the total of the car parks. John is right. Mike Westwood, who is my parking manager, is here to answer any detailed questions on the individual car parks themselves. Overall, the numbers of vehicles parking in the towns remain broadly consistent. The phrase is, in some respect, would long stay when a car park is full, a car park is full. But it does show that there was increased number of vehicles parking in the car parks where the tariffs had been reduced during the trial. However, that was offset by a reduction in visitors to the nearby car parks where they weren't part of the trial. So there's a cause and effect with the trial itself. Our recommendations is the data is as it is. We've set out the background of why the trial was put in place, the advice that was taken. For me, however, what's interesting is we have the information now within the car parking machines of the income from the individual car parks themselves, the transactions and the movement towards card payments rather than cash. The dwell time, an interesting phrase, but how long are people actually staying in the car parks themselves to actually spend money in the towns? And the weather does have a substantial effect. Someone said to me at the beginning of the year, what do you pray for? And I pray for sunshine, particularly on the coastal towns. But however, we've had a decrease in the sunshine hours over the last 2 years and an increase in rain, which does affect the car park tariffs, particularly in tier 3s. So we've set out what the budget implications are of the trial. We've also set out, which is quite important, the summary of the customer feedback. Some people may question whether you ask a person whether they would park more if you charge less. But actually, it does influence the decision of the visit and what people do, how long they stay in a resort, how much money they spend in a resort as well. And overall, people said that they would spend more money in the towns if the charges were less. And that's a factual statement. However, the weather didn't affect their decision to visit, which is interesting. The other part, which is important for me, and one of the reasons why the trial was about the effect on the businesses. And that's not just the businesses in the towns, but businesses across Dorset. And Councillor Andrews is making it very clear to me there are other car parks in other areas of Dorset, not just the trial itself. I'm saying, if I may say that out loud. So not all the information is here at the end of, we will actually have to undertake a full car parking review for budgetary purposes, and also as we go forward as an authority. And also there is a link to the previous discussion point about climate change and sustainability, people travelling or the need to travel, and make sure that we have alternatives in place. I'm going to stop there, Chair, if I may. Mike's here who can answer these questions about the data. Always bring a friend to committee who can answer those points, but we'll leave it there, Chair, if that's helpful.
Thank you, Matthew. So, John, did you want to add anything to that? Because this is your time to come in if you wish to speak on it.
No, Chair, I think it's quite a comprehensive report. Matthew said all I need to say, and Mike's here to answer any questions on the data.
Fantastic, thank you. As I said, this is something that I specifically requested along with the Vice Chair as well, because I think that when we do run a trial, it's important that we judge it on its effectiveness, especially then to decide whether it becomes a permanent change, which I guess is the goal of most trials, is to look as if they'll work permanently. So I will move to non-Cabinet members first. Councillor O'Leary's been very quick. Can you assure me it's a question?
Thank you very much. When these charges were introduced by the previous administration, of which I was a party member of, I was openly critical, as Councillor Bryan can well attest to. Now there's a new administration, I don't think anyone would expect me to be less critical, especially when during this year's election, the pledge was made, I quote, to remove steep car park increases in Weymouth. That is the direct quote. While this trial, which has cost the council money and hasn't seemingly increased numbers using the car parks, I still fully support that pledge. I ask, do the administration intend to carry it out?
We're looking at the effectiveness of this trial, not looking at the car parking charges. And I think I would be unfair if I push for an answer for that at this point. I think that's a budgetary thing. Unless if you want to answer, I will. I try to keep us away from the political and that sort of stuff. But I'm aware that does stick into it. No? Okay, I'm getting a shake. I'm getting a shake of head from John behind you. He's shaking, so awesome. So, Louis, if that's okay with you, I'll let you take that one to full council as a question, or cabinet as a question. You'll see. Okay. Craig, come on in.
Thank you, Chair. Craig Monks, Bedminster Ward. Just two questions, really. And perhaps it's the fault's on me in the way I've read the report, but I found it quite interesting that the percentage increase of two of the car parks was relatively low, albeit higher, around 3%, but West Bay was much higher. I just wonder what your thoughts are on that. Why? I mean, it's great news for West Dorset, but I wonder why we think that West Bay performed so much better. And the other question with regards to, I'm sort of going to be cheeky and ask too. You talked in the report about the effects of weather, but I also found it interesting that, and again, I can't remember if it was business owners or people completing surveys suggested that for them personally, weather wasn't an issue. So it kind of leaves this kind of question mark over how to really analyse the results so far, because we think maybe weather played a part in the results, albeit it's still some stats to come through. But the people that we're trying to help suggest it doesn't. So I wonder how conclusive the study could be so far. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Michael Westwood, Service Manager for Parking. To take the first question in relation to West Bay and why there was a larger increase in that area. Two main reasons there. I mean, it's quite a small geographical area. It's probably used more by residents. But the main reason is the local residents were very keen to make sure everyone knew, and were putting signs up in all the car parks saying, do you know you can park cheaper in this car park here? And, you know, it worked. But even then, the move, it was considerably more than the other two areas, but wasn't as much as we'd have liked to have seen. The second question in relation to the weather, there's interestingly enough, between the residents and the businesses, there was a real divide there, where the residents sort of came back and said, you know, weather doesn't make an effect to my visit. The businesses said, yes, weather makes an effect to the number of customers we get. There's more research for us to do, more analysis to do of that of those answers. Some of it may be down to the fact that the people we were asking were visiting a car park on a rainy day, which will have an effect because they're people perhaps that have to go out whether it's raining or not. You know, we see in our figures routinely, you can see the difference between a rainy weekend and a warm weekend. It stands out really well for us. And there's a massive difference. So from my point of view, looking at the sort of longer term figures over several years, that we can watch that weather effect to the incoming car parks. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, I just got to quickly come back. So I guess, sorry, I saw a hand come up in the corner, so I didn't really jump in. I guess from a scrutiny perspective, and I know there's still some stats to come through, but a slight concern for me is that with the slightly conflicted information from people that completed the survey and the relatively small improvement to car park use compared to the kind of loss of revenue, do we think that we will have enough data to scrutinise and come to a point that we can look at the review and say, yes, it was worth it? Or could the conclusion be, actually, there's nothing really, there wasn't a great benefit compared? And maybe you can't answer that right now, but I thought I'd ask anyway.
Can I just say we won't be answering that until the review takes place?
Yeah, no worries. I think if there's enough data for us to scrutinise it, is down to us, and we can give comment on the current data. And I think when the review happens, I'm hopefully we'll be involved in that somehow. That'll be useful. Belinda, you are next. Come forward.
Thank you, Chairman. Belinda Borden, Lyme Regis and Charmouth. I'd like to ask whether or not you've, as part of your review, whether you've actually spoken to the Lyme Regis Town Council, because it's quite interesting that even though the weather was awful this year compared to last, all of the Lyme Regis Town Council car parks have seen a substantial increase to their surprise, given the weather. And that may explain why Charmouth Road has only a slight percentage increase, because the car parks are already full. So the loss in revenue is not because it's not being used, it's because just that what was because of the trial, because of the price drop. So I'm just wondering whether you've had a chance to kind of, swap information and talk to them about it, because they were surprised just how well, given that the weather the previous year was so good, that the car park figures have really surprised them.
Can I answer that, Chair? Well, answer one part of it anyway. I don't know whether that increase at Lyme Regis Town Council has been revenue or numbers. So that's the first question that we need to decipher and ask. I'll hand over the mic for the second bit of the answer.
From the perspective of gathering further information, when we carry out the full review, yes, we will be in contact with other town councils who run car parks and areas where we do, to see how theirs have performed against us. And we already do speak to them now to compare how we're getting on and how we're operating and how we're working to try and sort of find best practice. And we try and work together to sort of find the cheapest way to run our businesses as well, obviously, and share some data. So, yeah, definitely. Yeah, we have and we will continue to.
Just to come back, it's numbers and revenue, but mainly numbers. It surprised them, because we haven't put our car parking charges up quite as much as Dorset did.
Super, thank you. So I have two people waiting. So Andrew, do you want to come in first?
Thank you, Chair. Marketing gurus such as Rory Sutherland of Ogilvy Group would describe price cutting as a race to the bottom and a blunt instrument that is rarely effective. They would favour instead taking revenue, and if you want to increase your revenues, they would suggest you would work in a way of proactive marketing, perhaps with partners such as the BID and Chamber of Commerce, which is not a route that we appear to have particularly embraced here. if you were going to spend, the best part of, £250,000 on a marketing campaign across Dorset, do you think we would have seen an uplift in our revenues in our car parks and perhaps a more proactive approach to supporting our market towns as well as our coastal towns? And the second part to my question is that clearly this has come at a cost to the Place Directorate. What services in the Place Directorate have been affected as a result of this decision?
Thank you, Chair. I think I've been directed to answer the financial question first, if I may. And Councillor Parry is, of course, completely right. Income from car parking charges is used to support the council's highway budget, so that income, is out there doing good work across Dorset. But we have been fortunate this year in that elsewhere in the place budget, we're yielding more income from recyclable materials than was originally expected when the budget was set. So I've been able to offset the decrease in car parking income against the increase in income from recycled materials, and therefore the Highway Department has not had to reduce its expenditure at all as a result of this trial.
Sorry, part of the trial we were assured circa £200,000 of efficiencies which could be identified within highways. So assuming those efficiencies were taken, we didn't just not take them, did we?
Yeah, I think as the pilot was brought in, that changed the budget. We didn't pursue efficiency savings to narrow that gap because I had no need to, because I was yielding more income elsewhere in the place budget than expected. So I've simply offset greater income in one place against slightly lesser income in another.
I think that's thankful, but I'm very concerned that we know there's £200,000 of efficiencies we've chosen not to take when I don't think we're coming in on target. So I think we need to think about the whole council, not just our own specific budgets. I think I'll leave that there because that's not really what's on this paper. I'm disappointed to hear that though. Councillor Parry, are you happy with that answer?
Well, Chairman, I mean, I'm pleased in the sense that the directors indicated that there hasn't been a cut to highways budgets, because we all know in our own wards, let alone across the county, the pressures that have been felt there. But the recyclate market is highly vulnerable. So clearly you couldn't bank on this as a future way forward if you wanted to rebalance parking charges. So yes, I'll say that perhaps the roulette table of life was kind to you on this occasion, but I don't think we could use that as a policy for the council for future.
No, I would completely agree, Councillor Parry. You're right. To a degree, we got lucky with that recycling income, but it has meant we haven't had to reduce services. Of course, cost implications will be drawn into the review when that takes place. So, we'll look at any cost implications if there are any, as part of that review when it comes forward.
So I just want to touch base. We were assured there would be no cuts. There were £200,000 worth of efficiencies that could be found in year within the place budget. That was stated as part of this, because the whole point of this was that it was cost neutral, because it was £60,000 saved from the lead members' budget and £200,000 of in-year savings from efficiencies. Because I think it's quite important that we now recognise that actually, so it hasn't been cost neutral from that respect. In fact, we got lucky, so to speak, with recyclates. So that does change the view on it, because if we are scrutinising something that actually was paid for itself already, that's different to scrutinising something that happened to be covered for 1 year and would have that effect. So now we have to really think about, when we're scrutinising this, is it worth the ongoing costs, because we can't guarantee on the recyclate prices. So I want to pull out that difference there for us going forward. And I'm sorry, because I know you have been waiting, Peter, so please do come in.
Thank you very much, Chair. Peter Dickinson, Littlemore, Preston and Sutton Points. Some of the questions that were asked by residents to me were, why was the Swannery car park picked as the Weymouth trial?
I'll come in on that one. That was a decision that was made when we were discussing it. We didn't want the traffic running all the way through Weymouth and coming back out. We picked the Swannery purely for climate and personal or health reasons rather than any other reason.
If I may say, John, a lot of the residents said all you've done is made it cheaper for the tourists and not the local people.
Yeah, but allied to the changes we made, we also increased, as was suggested by the previous administrations, Councillor Bryan and Councillor not Lacey Clark, to increase the residence permit to 3 hours instead of 2, which made a considerable difference. I don't think we've had any negative feedback about that being increased.
Yeah, I think for locals, the permits are a way to push any resident that has concerns. I think that's an excellent point and a very welcome increase for an hour. Councillor Dickinson, come on back.
Yeah, the permits are okay for people that can afford them. That's what I'm trying to get at. To me, you didn't help the local people in this trial. And the permits are a good thing if you can afford them. And a lot of people who are on just weekly budgets and want to use their car to go into town couldn't. They can't afford the permits in one massive hit.
But the Swannery and North Quay, etc., were all available. There are other car parks within the Weymouth infrastructure to be able to take the locals. And I would suggest if you're going into Weymouth to shop, you probably wouldn't park in the Peninsula or car park. So that would be my argument against that. But certainly there was measures in place to make things cheaper for locals.
I think now we've had it confirmed that there's a review coming up. I actually think some of these discussions are better placed there. This is judging the outcome of this trial, and then if it should be considered going forward before the budgetary point being set, I think. So let's try to keep to that if that's okay. Any other non-committee members that wish to speak? And all my cabinet members are welcome to speak if they want to ask any questions. You don't have to. Yeah, no. Okay, we'll move to committee members then. We have a few. Councillor Turk, go for it.
Thank you, Chairman. The reason that the decision was taken to trial the reduction in charges followed concerns raised by local communities when the charges were increased by the previous administration in 2023. And the idea was to understand the impact that the increase in charges has made to occupancy and the length of stay in car parks. What is not really in this report, it's mentioned obliquely, and we've got some information from the businesses, but we don't have any real data. There we are, this word again, lots of data. We don't have a lot of real data on footfall in the shopping areas, footfall in the tourist areas, footfall in the local shopping areas where locals who live in Weymouth would go to shop rather than the places the tourists might fall into. I think we need to have a mobile microphone. So when can we get some data as to what the effect has been on the actual businesses within Wareham? Because those are the people that this was designed to help. And there's very little data on that. I'd quite like to see some of that. Possibly that will come into the more detailed review that's coming up. But I'll simply ask the question, how can we find this out?
Fantastic, yeah. And I think that actually Councillor Piles, sorry, I can't help myself, that Matthew Piles has alluded to some of this data already when he said about the number of visitors and the shop's responses to that. So could you extrapolate on that?
Sorry, thank you, Chair. I know. Oh dear. I think to answer your question is actually we're discussing with the local bids, in particular Weymouth and the Chamber of Commerce, about the effects of Weymouth and the place it is, and that will be part of the review. Some of the data that you're referring to actually is confidential when people collect it. It's quite difficult, it's very expensive, a radar footfall data. But what we can do is talk to people like the bid for mobile signals of webcams as well, and that's taken as part of what we will discuss as part of the review. So please wait till we all come back, but we need to engage with the local businesses and communities to ask for further information of what they think.
I will call Yanis shortly. I just want to ask something. I want to make sure I understand. Yeah, Yanis coming in next, don't worry. I want to make sure I understand something. The review that's happening, is this review about parking charges specifically in Weymouth, or is this the whole of the council? Because I thought this is reviewing this particular piece. So if that data exists, we kind of need it for this bit as well.
So we're reviewing the trial, Chair, as requested. That data does not exist at the present moment. And then the rest of Dorset, there will be a further discussion about data, but I think my exec wants just to clarify something.
Thank you, Chair. In addition to what my colleague has just said, I was going to perhaps flag a little bit of a warning that the data we've collected from businesses is essentially opinion data. Do you think it's made a difference to your business? I think were we to look at sort of broader economic data about footfalls, number of visitors and so on, the percentage change that this review might have had in a place like Weymouth or West Bay is going to be so small and so subject to other variable factors such as weather that I doubt very much whether we would be able to construct, an analytical basis for drawing conclusions with regard to car parking. So we can certainly look at the data that's available. But for example, if we were looking at footfall in Weymouth town centre over the period of this trial and comparing it with previous years, I think it would be statistically impossible to attribute that to a change in car parking charges and to draw any legitimate conclusions from it.
I think this is the first time I've ever come across someone, I think, admitting that actually what we didn't make a difference. And actually, I think that makes it a lot easier for us to have this discussion.
With respect, Chair, I didn't say that it didn't make a difference. I said that I didn't think we could statistically prove the difference that it made.
I think you also said statistically minuscule at one point as well. And I think that the amount of time people are staying in the car parks, the amount of people that are in the car parks, shows very minor difference in the data. And actually, if we're saying that it didn't have a difference or noticeable distance in the number of people on the street as well, maybe actually there's something about, there's not, I don't know, unless anyone wants to disagree with that, I kind of think that actually it's the opposite of what I thought we were kind of going to come to, but it might be a case that this actually is good. Trial didn't actually do what we want, but they're doing a whole review instead. Let's wait for that review maybe. John, yeah, do you want to come in?
And that's why they call it a trial. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why we did that process.
So, unless anyone wants to dig in from the committee into this, but I do think it's very clear that we have it kind of here now. I don't think we need to say much more than, actually, we tried it, may not have made, it didn't seem to make the difference we thought it would, so we're going to do a full review instead and see if there's another way of doing it. Is it really, really important?
It is.
Okay.
It is, because we have members of the public online.
Yep.
And I think it's very important. I come from the real world of industry. Apologies for saying that. But if I can suddenly sell a product that will gain me more profit, then I don't think it's right to then offset it by something else. So I'm picking on what you said, Jan, and apologies. Aidan sat next to you. He would love to have that extra money in waste that he could spend elsewhere. The bottom line is we had the opportunity to balance. We've come up with a balance, but the bottom line is we still have spent £250,000 on an exercise. Whether it was right or wrong is not for me to worry about. What is to worry about is the fact that that £250,000 was originally stated would be made out of savings in highway. You've been able to offset it.
But that isn't what we are scrutinising, to be clear. That is a budget conversation, and I think we should register our opinions on the fact that wasn't found and wasn't followed through separately. We are discussing the trial, and I think we need to be really careful we don't slip into that. I think we've made our views clear on that. We can send emails and letters. I think, yeah. And I think there's been a really good admission for the trial, and we tried it, and that was fantastic. And so I think we should leave it there, unless anyone on the committee disagrees.
I'm never going to disagree with you, Chairman.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I wouldn't dare.
And I'm sorry.
But I do think it was a valid point to make.
It's a very valid
because
point.
the public have heard the comment.
Yeah, it is a very valid point for the whole council, but not for this discussion. Okay, and I'm sorry. I do try to be equally awful to everybody. I try not to pick on people. And so I think we say thank you very much. Our recommendation is that we agree with Jan's opinion. It wasn't successful, and we'll await the full trial.
That's not what he said.
Oh, sorry, that it didn't have a noticeable effect, and so I think we'll go with that. And for the sake of the minutes, thank you very much for bringing the trial back. Don't think it's going to be carried on. Look forward to the full review. Is that happier with that wording? No.
I have perhaps read a little bit more into my words than I meant. My colleague on my right said in the course of the conversation to me that something as simple as one extra cruise ship in a year or one extra cruise ship in the season coming into Portland and visitors into Weymouth could attribute for any noticeable difference that we might make. And so I think the core of my point was that it would be very difficult to attribute any change across the whole town centre very specifically to a change in parking charges when there are so many other variable factors at play. And I think that was the heart of what I was trying to say.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. I think it was also, to be very clear, it was very clearly stated that in the data that actually the number of people using, staying, and the length of time had small variance, not much. And I think you also said it's very clear that with the data that wasn't collected, but we would hope would have been in the future, that actually be a very small difference. And I think that was enough. That's fine. And I agree. I think if we could get 2 more cruise ships here every year, that would have a really positive effect on Weymouth. And hopefully that's part of things that are happening. But again, not part of this. Yeah? Happy with that? Everyone happy? No one's going to be angry with me? Awesome. In that case, we don't need to do the exempt business because there is none now, because we don't need to discuss that further. I believe that is the end of the meeting. Thank you all so much. Sorry it went on a little bit.